Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittens, it's your boy DBiddles. Welcome to Chatbots. Welp, I done it. A whole year with my channel. A channel where I build toys, talk robots, and chat about whatever pea-brain silliness is on my mind. One whole year of all that. Now that's not really an impressive accomplishment given how small and cringe my content is, but it's neat for me, particularly since I have a bad habit of dropping projects after getting distracted. And I'm proud of reaching this milestone, even if I do have the incentive of getting a new robot toy after each episode completed, motivating me onward. But either way, it's a milestone nonetheless, so why don't I indulge a little? Or indulge a little more, I suppose. This whole series is basically an exercise in indulging myself. This episode and next, I'll cover two mecha series very near and dear to my heart. Two series that are not just some of my favorite mecha anime, but are among my top 5 favorite anime of all time of any genre. And maybe I'll try to make them connect thematically. And hey, if that all sounds cool and good and you want to congratulate me on making my silly little internet videos for one whole trip around the sun, maybe you could give that like button and that subscribe button a quick tap for me. Thank you so much. And now, without further ado, ladies, gentlemen, and others, behold, the Evangelion Unit-01 from Neon Genesis Evangelion. So by now, you know how this goes. First we do the bot talk before we do the real talk. Now, Eva's another one of those series that doesn't need too much introduction, but that's only because oceans of ink have been spilled about this show since its premiere in 1995, courtesy of creator and director, the brilliant yet tormented Hideaki Anno. You may remember him from last episode's Gunbuster. Evangelion is to anime what Star Wars is to blockbuster big-budget American cinema. A total game changer and a massively popular and influential piece of media that not only broke new grounds for what was possible for the medium while lovingly playing with and homaging the tropes of its genre, but in many people's minds, it has come to embody those tropes as kind of the new standard for that genre. And not unlike Star Wars, because of its massive, overwhelming, and hyper-popular ubiquity, it's also spawned a lot of very polarizing and passionate opinions about it. If you've seen Eva, and in case I'm not yet clear on this, you absolutely should try it out if you're a fan of anime, or just cool, weird, unique, artsy stuff in general. But if you've seen it, you probably fall into one of two camps. Either you're like myself, a zealous advocate for its shining brilliance and an ardent defender of its flaws, which are not flaws but delicately crafted nuance, or you're a heretic! Sorry. Or you're completely bewildered by its popularity and are a harsh critic of its unlikable cast, its seemingly incoherent use of religious and mythological symbolism, and its mystifyingly pretentious avant-garde finale. It's extremes on both ends, I'm afraid. There's typically very little room for middle ground with the Evangelion fandom. I should note that I hadn't watched all of Rebuild before writing this script, so that's not included in my analysis. Maybe we'll do another video for Rebuild sometime later in the future. Maybe. But anyways, the story goes that some 15 years prior to the events of Episode 1, mankind endured Second Impact, a brief initial attack from surreal extra-dimensional horrors known as the Angels. And needless to say, humanity was put on its back foot from contact with these completely incomprehensible beings. It's sometimes vaguely implied that they might be the biblical angels, either by virtue of being the servants of God, or by virtue of being alien creatures that ancient mankind wrote into their various religions, though evidence for either of these explanations is spotty. Regardless, in the intermediary time since Second Impact, the human race has been fervently developing the means by which we might defend ourselves, and our efforts have borne fruit in the form of the Evangelion units, constructed, or perhaps more accurately conjured, by the genius bastard and madman Gendo Ikari. And now, with the angels returning to our plane of existence, it is up to Gendo's estranged son, the timid, lonely, and emotionally neglected Shinji Ikari, to pilot this weapon into battle against the besieging horrors from beyond the veil of space-time. And if that already seems a tall order from our reluctant hero, let's not forget that the Eva Unit-01 itself seems to be much more than meets the eye, as this bizarre and unhinged machine seems to be much less a thing of conventional science, and much more the result of some kind of dark, abominable alchemy. The kind of thing that probably should not exist, and that even a well-adjusted person would struggle to control, much less a scrawny, neurotic, traumatized teenager. And that usually lies at the heart of a lot of people's frustration with Eva. The common rationale employed in defense of Eva, so common it's actually a meme unto itself, is that all the haters simply aren't smart enough to appreciate it. And while I think that's a very masturbatory and reductive view of people's criticisms, I do think that a lot of people don't quite get Eva. I mentioned back in my award-winning Line Barrel episode that in Japan, the super robot genre and its many titles were basically a cornerstone of the Japanese pop cultural landscape, where everyone had at least a rudimentary appreciation for the basic tropes and story beats, but that this was a lot less common here in America. So for example, I don't need to tell you viewers who Garfield the Cat is. You all already know his deal. You know his love of lasagna and naps, know his hatred of Mondays. Even without having to read many Garfield comics, you know Garfield just through cultural osmosis. But short of someone like myself explaining it to you, how much would you likely know about Brave Radine or Steeljeeg? The closest we had to standard super robot fare by the time we received Eva on our shores was just old episodes of Voltron and Power Rangers, and even those were not necessarily standard viewing for most then-contemporary American anime enthusiasts. Whereas Mazinger Z was the progenitor of the super robot genre and a cultural icon in his home country, he was a bit more of an unknown stateside, having only aired briefly in select regions here in the US. And regrettably, I've only just received my chosen Mazinger kit, and I'm still brainstorming how I want to present him to you all. However, it's that story that Evangelion is riffing on. So, to make the situation comparable to a more American perspective, imagine trying to read Alan Moore's Watchmen without ever having heard of Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Captain America, or any other superhero, with your only other point of reference for superheroes being, I don't know, Green Hornet? And you haven't even read Green Hornet, really, you just kind of know basically who he is. Now, under those circumstances, you can still read and appreciate Watchmen, but a little bit of what the story is trying to convey is going to be lost on you. And I feel like that's part of why people tend to be repelled by Shinji in trying to experience Eva. They're getting Night Owl and Rorschach and the Comedian and Dr. Manhattan without having the knowledge of Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and Captain America to compare them all to and understand that they're meant to be a deconstruction of them. Though I should mention that Eva was not the first to try to put an alternate spin on the mecha genre, contrary to what many might say. Another one of the many memes surrounding Evangelion discourse is the phrase, "Get in the fucking robot, Shinji!" A call to action for the wimpy and whiny main character, who never really seems to grow into the role of typical heroic anime protagonist being thrust upon him. Audiences tend to expect Shinji to eventually reach a pivotal point where he finally claims his destiny, accepts the mantle of humanity's savior, and achieves that more conventionally heroic status where he becomes the badass who will overcome every obstacle in his way. But that's not really what he is, that's not really the story Evangelion's trying to tell, and that's not really what happens. Shinji isn't Gohan, he doesn't eventually turn Super Saiyan. Shinji has a different arc. In contrast to Mazinger's pilot, Koji Kabuto, Shinji's not especially confident or emotionally well-adjusted due to the years of abuse and neglect from his only living family member, Gendo. Shinji's dad is a dogshit human being, and he's never really even attempted to be any kind of father to the boy. Nor is Shinji socially fulfilled with interpersonal support from anywhere else. He's moved around all his life. His classmates distance themselves from him. The various adults associated with the Evangelion are reliant on his performance, but are unable to connect with him, and he doesn't have a spunky love interest like Mazinger's Sayaka Yumi. Instead, he is sexually frustrated by the equally immature and emotionally unavailable Rei Ayanami and Asuka Langley Soryo, who both keep him at arm's distance despite his best efforts to connect with them. Even his surrogate big sister, Misato Katsuragi, has a professional obligation to not let herself dote on him too much, and her role as the Eva team's commanding officer requires her to expect results out of her charges rather than permitting her to coddle them. Not that she's particularly well equipped for such a role. "You're a boy, act like one," she chides at one point, trying to shame Shinji for not living up to a more masculine ideal that'd be more conducive to robot piloting. Everyone's counting on Shinji to step up to the plate, but they all seem either incapable of or unwilling to actually connect with him as a human. The series frequently cites the fable of the hedgehog's dilemma, where hedgehogs are unable to get close to and embrace each other without stinging each other with their quills, and where the closer they do get, the deeper their quills harm each other. And indeed, all the characters in Evangelion are fairly curt and casual with each other, afraid to really connect in any meaningful way for one deep-rooted psychological reason or another. And when they try, they only seem capable of hurting one another. Why would he want to save a world full of people who all rely on him, but who seemingly refuse to sympathize with him? All these fucked up, broken souls who are too mired in themselves to muster any sincere kindness for this alienated young man? Saving the world is a tall burden to set on the shoulders of any teenager. I don't know that anyone could realistically expect good results from any single individual saddled with the fate of all existence, much less one caught in the middle of the most awkward, insecure, confusing, and overwhelming point in their lifetime: adolescence. It's one of those things that so much of anime takes for granted, that individual teenagers would somehow rise to the occasion when all the adults have failed. I don't know about you, but at age 15, I wasn't exactly capable of mastering a bankai or wielding One For All with any sort of grace. I could barely walk down the halls or talk to girls without stumbling all over myself. And in my personal time, I was busy playing GameCube, avoiding interacting with my family, and hiding cum socks at the bottom of the laundry pile on the far side of my bed. That's just kind of how teenagers universally are. Overwhelmed, immature, self-centered, raw, caught in this weird twilight of their lives, no longer a child, but not yet capable of handling adulthood. And so many of us go for years and years just adulting, but never really feeling like or acting like an actual adult. And once again, to compare Shinji to Koji Kabuto, it's not like the threat he faces is cackling supervillains with armies of fairly mundane and easily understandable Kakaiju. Evangelion's angels are beings that generally seem to defy our understandings of biology and physics, much less our understanding of behavioral psychology. These trend more to the biblically accurate representation of angels, with few of them bearing anything remotely close to humanoid anatomy. Most of them are truly alien and inhuman and completely unrelenting in their tactics, incapable of any communication or emotion that we can comprehend, but they seem intelligent and capable of devising strategies to succeed in eliminating us, while being totally unyielding in their efforts. There's no telling what they're thinking or why they're doing what they're doing. Maybe they're trying to communicate but don't do so in any way that humans can recognize, like in Ender's Game. Maybe they're unusually crafty extraterrestrial fauna trying to feed on some resource found on our planet. Maybe our existence threatens their own. Maybe they're just contemptful and indifferent to humanity in some sort of eldritch way that boggles the mind. Maybe they just have a grudge against the Evangelions specifically. Maybe they're all too human and are just lashing out at things they don't understand, not unlike ourselves. Evangelion's often closer to a horror story than a mecha story in tone. It's all daunting and terrifying enough for Shinji to maybe seek shelter within the seclusion of this giant armored behemoth, to hide behind the AT field which surrounds it and the monsters he fights, to isolate in this metal fortress of super science, to crave the comfort and stillness and unconditional acceptance of a motherly embrace that he's been denied his entire life. To just get in the fucking robot. One could easily liken Japan's fascination with the mecha genre, particularly the single-pilot mechs, to their deeply rooted historical and geographical tendency towards isolationism and hostility to outside nations. Perhaps the amniotic warmth of the LCL fluid that fills the Eva's cockpit is instinctually comforting in the way that all of humanity subconsciously desires to return to the womb. But even there, inside the Eva, Shinji is made to suffer. Let's talk about the Unit 1 for a second, because it's one of those incredible mecha designs that not only looks cool, but reinforces the plot and themes kind of like we saw in my Scope Dog video. The Eva eschews the traditional color theory of most heroic super robots, rejecting the conventional white and bold primaries in favor of the bizarre, discordant, unsettling secondary colors of bright purple with green and orange accents. Looking again to superheroes, you'll notice a lot of reds, blues, and yellows on the likes of Superman, Flash, Iron Man, Captain America, Wonder Woman, Thor, and others. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor, Joker, Doctor Doom, Magneto, Thanos, and Galactus embrace the inverse palette, and that's usually intentional. It's not unheard of, but it is uncommon to see heroes who prominently sport secondary colors like the Hulk or Raven or the Phantom, and oftentimes those colors convey a sort of otherness to those characters, a sort of poison dart frog warning to others that this subject might be a little more potent and temperamental than your typical specimen. And unlike most other mecha, Unit 1 sports a lot more anatomical features and proportions in its body, almost like it's a lithe and organic being with mechanical parts attached to it, rather than a blocky machine shaped like a man. Almost as if it's trying to disguise, or rather, trying to contain its true nature, as some kind of vulnerable, fallible figure rather than a precise machine automaton. And indeed, contained is precisely what it is. While intended to be a tool, an instrument of the pilot's will and by extension the forces that employ the pilot, it's pretty quickly revealed that the Eva is actually a beast entirely of its own nature. This is especially evident in how the thing moves, a feature that is enhanced by the original series' quite expertly implemented and beautifully fluid animation during its action sequences. Very quickly we see glimpses of the Eva's true nature when the Berserker mode is activated, and the thing is laid bare for what it is. A barely shackled monstrosity, one with frantic, bestial movements guided by instinctual frenzy and desperation. A thing only just barely held in check by the mechanical restraints, some sort of unholy fusion of science and sorcery, a thing at odds with itself and everyone around it. The cast are all quite reasonably horrified whenever it gets loose and starts acting without the pilot's direction, because it clearly has a will of its own, and their protector is only their protector so long as the current battle hasn't gone so poorly as to completely bewilder poor Shinji and trigger the Eva's utterly brutal fight-or-flight response. Underneath that helmet that it wears is a ravenous maw and piercing eyes, and it roars with a deep, throaty bellow from the bowels of its madness that it's just waiting to unleash upon the world. Not to mention any damage that it receives is neurologically inflicted upon the pilot via synaptic feedback through their plug suits. Get in the fucking robot, Shinji, is an utterly inane remark in the face of this haunted, twisted, cruel, and savage monstrosity that only occasionally permits itself to be controlled, and at all other times runs wild and enacts its unspeakable will whenever it's provoked. And surely few things are as provoking as fighting other monsters. Once again, to cite Mazinger Z, "With this machine you can be like unto a god, or a devil." And nowhere is this dichotomy more terrifyingly real than in the entry plug of Evangelion Unit 1 as it sings its cruel angel's thesis and heralds the apocalypse, because it rejects the whims of the pilot trying to be a god. Or perhaps it's merely accepting the imperfection of said pilot and ending up a devil. He who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man. And beasts need not fraternize with men. Beasts need not be hurt by other men. Is it any wonder that poor Shinji is the way he is? Withdrawn, listless, misanthropic, lonely, bitter, awkward, pathetic, self-loathing, desperate for some hint at acceptance, some tenderness and ability to be vulnerable, when all he's met with is hedgehog embraces? Desperate for agency when the world and everyone around him has plans that ignore his wants and needs, merely using him, piloting him, as some instrument to their own selfish salvation. Desperate for just some small peace of mind, for a night under a familiar ceiling in a place that he might call home. for a tender touch that penetrates the absolute terror field of his all-too-human psyche and tells him that he is not alone. Setting aside the Kabbalistic imagery and the psychologically surreal ending that suffered from production setbacks and the emotional and mental instability of the primary creative, the hardest thing for most people to grapple with in regards to Eva is the characters, all of whom are deeply flawed and frustratingly human, but deliberately so as a reflection of creator Anno. They're meant to be upsetting, almost infuriating at times, doing insensitive, often callous things to each other, but in ways that are uncomfortably relatable. It doesn't absolve them of their misdeeds, but it kind of puts them into perspective in a way that makes them tragically sympathetic. When Shinji does one of his most notoriously awful acts later in the series, and then remarks to himself, "I'm so fucked up," you can feel it, this absolute disdain for himself, and this helplessness to feel anything other than wretched and trapped within himself. At another point he remarks, "I'm selfish and a coward," while being confronted by his own self-critical psyche during a psychic attack from the angels. He refers to himself as selfish and cowardly because what? Because he's pissed terrified of fighting and possibly dying in some mad mechanical monster while doing battle with extra-dimensional horrors, all on behalf of a world that never cared for him before and is only putting pressure on him now that it needs him? It's not as if the other pilots who are more receptive to piloting are more psychologically sound. If anything, it's evidence of them being more fucked up than him. Everyone is hard on Shinji, but nobody is as hard on him as he himself is. I talked about how capable I would have been of saving the world at age 15, but fuck, I wasn't even capable of accepting myself at that age. I was so fucking confused and miserable and at odds with everyone around me, as I'm sure so many of us were in adolescence. Your teenage years are a pretty universally volatile experience. So much confusion and self-doubt from grappling with your own shifting biology and radically changing social expectations as adulthood looms low overhead. How capable would any of us be of singularly saving the world then, or even past that age? How capable are any of us at handling even the mundanity of our own existence, huddled together in a densely packed and interdependent society, yet paradoxically separate from the inner turmoil that surrounds and penetrates and alienates everyone? Can any of us break through the AT field? How can we be expected to survive if we can't connect and are merely trapped alone with ourselves, scared, desperate, and so utterly alone? Can Shinji find it within himself to value himself? Can he overcome the odds and find a way to love himself despite the immense external pressures and lack of support? I strongly encourage you to check out Evangelion, but do so with an open mind and adjusted expectations. A real-world tragedy at the time of the show's production led to severe changes to the story and a loss of budget, and that, coupled with Anno's own shifting artistic vision, led to some, let's call it, creative direction in the latter half of the series. Which means it gets all artsy-fartsy, abstract, avant-garde, psychological, and weird. And that's the other thing that the haters all really dislike about Evangelion. It gets super fucking weird. In all seriousness, it's not a perfect work despite some of my earlier comments, but it's a compelling one. I'm not going to tell you it's not messy, but I think the mess is kind of what makes it so interesting. It's less of a plot and more of a character study, and one of the main characters that it's studying is its own troubled creator. And if you don't like it, that's fair. I won't accuse you of not getting it, especially after having heard me monologue about it up until now. If you do choose to give it a shot, start with the original series, watch through to episode 24, then watch the film End of Evangelion. Don't bother with Death and Rebirth. And then go back and watch the final 2 episodes of the series, and then watch the Rebuild films. I know I'm really selling this with all the caveats, but, trust me. Now, if you're a dub guy like me, I highly recommend finding the original ADV dub rather than the Netflix dub. I can't guarantee you'll like it, particularly when it gets really bug-fuck nuts with trying to be artsy and psychological, but maybe part of it will resonate with you like it did with me when I was a withdrawn, listless, misanthropic, lonely, bitter, awkward, pathetic, self-loathing, desperate young man. And all of that finally leads me into today's topic, and the disclaimers I have for it. Now, I hope that the following content can bring some kind of intellectual fulfillment to anyone who might be listening, but I feel I should mention that a few bits of this video will be told from the perspective of myself, a cishet white American dude. I don't want to invalidate any other perspectives or say that my perspective is especially burdened, not at all, but it's somewhat unique in a couple ways that the following content will reflect on, and that some of it might not be relevant to everyone. I will strive to consider other perspectives, and much of what I have to say, I suspect, will be somewhat universal, but if you want, you can consider this another entry in my ongoing list of dude episodes. Previous entries have included my Valkyrie video and the aforementioned Line Barrel episode. Capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, hierarchy, and/or hegemony oppresses us all, but my limited perspective means that there will be some degree of specialized focus that I'm more suited to give voice to. Also, I feel I should mention that this is going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride going forward. Yeah, wouldn't you know that I'd use Evangelion to address some pretty heavy subject matters. Some talk of mental illness, depression, ideation of the unaliving sort, and the real-world issues that contribute to all of those. This script is going to be a tough one for me to write, and it might be a tough one to listen to if you're not in the right headspace. I'm going to try and bring us to a light on the other side of this tunnel, but if this feels like it might not be the sort of thing you want to deal with right now, I totally understand. Go ahead and dip now and definitely come back for the next one. Just a little heads up, bot buds. So hey, it's rough out there in the world, isn't it? Not an especially novel observation by any stretch, but one I'm sure a great many of us are finding particularly true here lately. It's increasingly evident that all of the worst people seem to be in the positions of highest authority, and they keep finding new ways to make things incrementally more and more horrible with each passing day. We're the frogs in the boiling pot, but we're watching the dial be turned on the burner. And even when we try to turn our eyes away from the dial being twisted, try to focus on ourselves treading water, we still feel the anxiety take hold of us in our quiet moments and take note of every bubble and vapor that signals the stew heating up. We're all struggling to keep up with the expectations. We're all working way too hard for way too little. We're all feeling atomized and alienated from one another. There's so much needless suffering in the world, and oh yeah, there's this ticking clock of oncoming climate change that all the people most capable of dealing with it seem to be too willing to ignore. I mean, I scarcely feel it necessary to articulate the ways in which this is happening. I'm sure you've all already mentally locked on to how specifically this phenomenon is manifesting in your own personal life or on a macro scale. But there you go, I hit some of the broad strokes. And while I've mentioned before that history has no shortage of bad times, even during those eras that we've convinced ourselves were simpler and less turbulent, none of that invalidates the way we feel or negates the facts of the here and now. But on the off chance that none of that seems at all relevant to you or your personal feelings at present, well, then congratulations. This one might not be the video for you. You've got the important part, the part where I talked about Evangelion. Why don't you go ahead and click on to a different video at this point, and I'll see you in the next one. But if you're still here, I presume you're acknowledging your own feelings of stress and anxiety regarding current circumstances. And isn't that fucking awful? That I don't know who might be listening right now, but that I feel confident in assuming that you're feeling stressed and maybe even a little depressed. I mean, I guess it's not too difficult to do, presuming a baseline of insecurity in everyone you meet is the starting point for all salesmen and con artists. But it still sucks that I can do not just that, but also presume you're feeling a constant sense of looming dread that would normally be reserved for the paranoid and mentally ill. So, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that far, far too many of us are living with chronic, untreated mental illness, and that's emblematic of the state of our society. Not that any amount of chronic, untreated mental illness is acceptable, but I fear it's becoming endemic now. And before anyone takes me the wrong way, no, I'm not about to try and sell you something with this observation. I don't have a sponsorship deal with BetterHelp or whatever. I used the phrase adulting a bit ago, and how many of you feel like you're doing that a lot lately? Like you're technically an adult and you technically do adult things, but it feels like you're just faking it. It's that nightmare scenario where there's been some kind of mistake. You've shown up in your underwear for some long practical exam you didn't study for, and you're just winging it and doing a pretty bad job at that, and everyone can tell you don't know what you're fucking doing. All the actual adults, our parents and grandparents, everyone you used to go to school with, they're all actually doing it right, and you're just occasionally getting lucky, occasionally able to do a totally normal adult thing like schedule a doctor's appointment or file your taxes. But at all other times, you feel like you're botching it somehow, and that you're really just a kid wearing clothes that don't fit, and you're carrying a briefcase full of important business papers that you don't fully understand. And the fact that you're failing at this thing that everybody's expected to do makes you feel even worse about things. How can you feel less helpless if you can't even do all these basic things? If you can't even meet the expectations of the world that everyone else seems to manage just fine? And that's before all the bad luck and occasional unexpected consequences of your actions start to pile up at your doorstep. Life just starts heaping on the bullshit little by little, like a shit sundae, complete with shit bananas, shit sprinkles, shit syrup, shit whipped cream, and a shit cherry on top. Your car is falling apart. You have some kind of health issue that makes doing basic stuff harder and subjects you to chronic pain. You lose your job, or you miss out on a precious couple days worth of pay. Your anxiety starts plaguing you and causes you enormous stress in your every still moment with your thoughts. Just all kinds of totally random, totally normal misfortune that seems to happen one thing right after another, right after you just finished dealing with the last problem, or sometimes even before that. The hits start coming and they don't stop coming. Nobody expects to go without a bit of rain in their lives, but sometimes it just starts to feel like it's always raining. You're just trying and struggling to accomplish a few minor things, and it seems like life is just picking on you, just constantly and maliciously lining up another fucking sucker punch. Sometimes as a direct result of you just trying to stumble your way through this mess and making a few innocent mistakes. And maybe you could get it together if you had some help, someone on your level who you could lean on, a partner who could make you feel like you're not as worthless and gross and weird as you constantly feel. But even that is so elusive. The few friends you're still on good terms with are so often busy with all their conflicting schedules. Finding time to do much beyond maybe a couple D&D sessions via Discord is just so difficult. And dating? Forget it. If you can even manage to match with someone potentially interesting, you're always walking a tightrope between not coming across as a psychopath and not falling prey to them being a psychopath. Always trying to be authentic while also not putting them off. Always trying to express interest without coming across as too desperate and too needy. Always trying to be nice when you're not interested, but trying to make it clear that you don't want to continue talking and hoping that they won't lash out at you for rejecting them. On and on. In short, always trying to be vulnerable while also always being guarded. And the fact that you're so often failing to make healthy, long-lasting, meaningful connections just makes the rest of it feel worse. It makes you feel like there really is something wrong with you that everyone else can see that you can't. Like maybe you really are botching this life thing up. It feels like everything's always falling apart, you can't do anything right, everything always seems to get worse, nobody cares about you, and none of it ever seems to get any better. How am I doing, viewer? How much of this do you relate to? I sincerely hope very little of it. I sincerely hope I'm missing my mark with some, or ideally with all of this. But sadly, so many of these feelings are all too common for way too many of us. We've all been shoved out into this cold, cruel, harsh, hostile, unforgiving world. And there's so many factors making it even more so in a lot of ways. They say college is really important. Getting a good education and a degree is so essential to doing well in life. You want to do something that matters, you want to make more money, you want to be better equipped to handle life's challenges, you got to get that diploma. College tuition has been steadily rising since about 1980. I mean, inflation has been pretty steadily rising too, but if you're a young person, a person who doesn't already have a lot of money because you don't have much work experience because, again, you're young, that just makes that first step of getting into college that much harder. Sure, your parents typically help you out with that if they can, but Sadly, wages have been pretty stagnant for a long time too. Purchasing power for the minimum wage peaked way back in 1968. The last nationwide minimum wage increase, which brought us to a national minimum of $7.25 per hour, came in 2013. But again, yearly inflation has been a consistent factor for a long time. Some states have individually raised state minimum wages, but 20 of them, Alabama, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Hampshire, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming, have all stayed at that $7.25, with only D.C., California, Connecticut, Washington, New Jersey, New York, Maryland, and Massachusetts getting up to a $15 or more minimum. Though, cost of living in a lot of those is pretty steep too, before any of you start getting any ideas. Well, hey, why not get one of those student loans everyone's always talking about? Surely once you get a job in your chosen field, you'll be able to pay it off in a couple years and then you'll be living large. Couple problems with all that. Firstly, there's no guarantee you'll be able to get a job that can pay off that loan after graduation. Unemployment rates among college grads are at around 4.4%, which is higher than the national unemployment average of around 3.6%, though it's at least lower than non-college grads who clock in at around 6.5%. A national average of 5% unemployment is generally considered ideal, so in that respect we could be considered to be doing good. But I'd argue that that's cold comfort to any grads who just got done going through the long, difficult, and expensive effort of getting a degree for the sake of acquiring a career. And further, underemployment rates, underemployment being when someone is forced to take a job of lower skill and lower wage than what they're trained and educated for, is at around 40%, meaning it's entirely possible you go through all that college only to still end up working some low-wage job to make ends meet. And only about 62% of students who start a degree program are able to complete their courses within 6 years. So the remainder either don't finish for one reason or another, but are saddled with the debt of that incomplete learning, or it takes them longer to complete, which just means more tuition spread out over more years, which again gets more expensive year after year. But secondly, paying off those student loan debts is pretty brutal. On average, a single borrower owes about $37,000 worth of debt, with over 600,000 borrowers in the U.S. owing in excess of $200,000 in debt. The total federal student loan debt in the U.S. is $1.6 trillion. So it's entirely possible that you could spend a bunch of time going to college only to go into a massive amount of debt. And as you might have heard, despite Joe Biden having passed some student loan debt relief plans, Republican congressmen seem intent on foiling that every step of the way, passing legislation to block any sort of student debt relief. And despite the legal viability of the federal government forgiving such debt, and despite what economists say about how this debt is crippling American spending habits, it doesn't matter. These politicians want to keep you in debt because their cruelty is the point. Keeping you constantly in debt, constantly financially insecure, that's the point. As of late January this year, the Biden admin is trying once again to pass another $5 billion in student loan forgiveness. $5 billion out of $1.6 trillion. It's a drop in the bucket. Ideally, everyone applicable will get to take advantage of it, but in keeping with the theme of this episode, I'm not maintaining a lot of hope for this outcome. And again, it's not exactly like there's a lot of opportunity for anyone who doesn't go to college. Wages are stagnating, starting rates are pretty abysmal, and companies are not in any hurry to be terribly competitive. I used to manage a 24-hour convenience store a few years back, and due to having difficulty hiring, I surveyed a number of comparable local businesses, small businesses, and chain stores, and I presented my findings to someone higher up in the company, pointing out that there was little to incentivize people to apply to us or to feel compelled to put much effort into keeping a job with us. Our pay rate was dirt, and if after a few weeks someone felt like the job just wasn't as easy or wasn't as ideal as they would have liked, they had nothing to lose from just jumping to any other job because they paid about the same. But I don't know, maybe those other jobs offered better benefits, or maybe there was the opportunity to make yourself a Big Mac for a free lunch. Or maybe there were coworkers who had mastered a routine for covertly smoking weed on the job, I don't know. And I was told by this corporate guy to my face that raising our pay rates would not be competitive because if we raised ours, the other businesses would just raise theirs, and then we'd just be right back where we started. Silly me, here I thought that that's exactly what competition was. It was constantly trying to outdo the other guy, and whoever blinks first in the game of chicken loses. And whatever their version of competition was, it clearly wasn't working anyways. I don't know, I thought the free market was supposed to weed out those who couldn't keep up. But let's face it, they don't mind high turnover at all. They love that shit. It's great for them. Because none of them have to work at an understaffed store due to high turnover. That's for all of us to deal with. We have to scramble around and scurry to make their fucking money. Meanwhile, high turnover means they don't have to increase pay rates over time. They don't have to offer paid time off. And they don't have to offer benefits. They love that shit. It's great for them. And when, people don't want to work for them, they can just commission mainstream media think pieces about why this generation is so work averse. Oh, nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody's got a good work ethic. Yeah. Meanwhile, in the back of their head, they know that there's always going to be another desperate person who will just take whatever scrap wages they give them because they just got out of college and they can't get a job in their field and they need to bring in some money because they're living with their parents again. Great system. While pay rates haven't moved up too significantly in most states, inflation is a constant force. Prices always creep upward, and the goal of all those fine folks you elect should be to minimize that or mitigate its effects on the general populace. After all, if your average citizen can't afford to live, they're going to gradually die off as a result of struggling and failing to meet the cost of living. And contrary to what your COVID conspiracy uncle might tell you, killing off large portions of your own populace is actually not all that conducive to maintaining control and power. Not to mention, if money is worth less, that affects rich people as well as poor people. They're less meaningfully harmed as far as meeting the cost of living, but if their wealth doesn't go as far, isn't worth as much, that stings them too. The Federal Reserve apparently has an ideal target inflation rate of 2% per year. So would it surprise any of you to hear that we're actually way higher than that the past few years since the pandemic? Would it surprise any of you to hear that all these companies that have been price gouging due to supposed supply chain issues and then maintaining those higher prices have actually been driving down the value of your dollars? Inflation was 7% in 2021, 6.5% in 2022, and 3.4% in 2023. So, at least it's trending downwards, but even if we were meeting our target rate, if the value inflates at all while you continue to not appreciably make more money, you're still losing out on money. Your dollar still isn't going as far. Your belt is still tightening. And after 2020, there's all kinds of really unfortunate things that might have happened to people that they're still struggling to recover from. A great many people lost their livelihoods during this time, lost their insurance coverage, lost their benefits, lost their ability to pay bills, and therefore maybe lost their cars or their homes. Many of them got sick. Many of them might still be saddled with medical debt. Many of them might still be suffering from long COVID, if they even survived it at all. As of 2023, roughly a third of all U.S. adults who were covered by the health insurance provided by their employer had medical debt that they were still paying off, and that percentage jumps to 41% of all uninsured adults. About a quarter of those owe more than $5,000, and a fifth of those with debt say they don't expect to ever be able to pay it off. 1 in 7 people with medical debt have been denied access to healthcare because of that debt, and 2/3 of people with medical debt put off pursuing medical care for themselves or family members because of the cost. So between school and healthcare, debt is just a perpetual reality for all too many people, and that makes paying your rent all the harder. You know, if you even have a place to live still. There was some rent deferral to prevent people being evicted during the 2020 pandemic, but not enough to keep everyone off the streets. And how's that housing market going? Still not great ever since the housing crash of '07, right? Meanwhile, landlords keep hiking up rent prices because they're doing the same thing that corporate dude from my story said in order to stay competitive, but by charging even higher rates. Households are considered to be cost burden when they spend in excess of 30% of their total income on rent or mortgage. And according to census data, in 2022, over 42 million American households were cost burdened. Housing costs have increased by about 31% since 2000, while wages have only increased about 10.4%. Now, it's hard to get a firm count of houseless people in America. Wouldn't you know it, not having a mailing address or reliable use of electronics makes it hard to keep track of people. But in that same year of 2022, the Department of Housing and Urban Development estimated that about 582,000 Americans were without homes. Now, to be fair, that is down quite substantially from the '07 housing crash, where about 647,000 people were without homes. But I'd argue that anyone being unhoused is way too many people, let alone when we measure them in the hundreds of thousands in the richest country on earth, particularly when there's that whole pandemic thing going on, or when we're experiencing record-level temperatures in the summer. The poverty rate in 2022 was 11.5%, and as of September of that year, 63% of American households live paycheck to paycheck, with 75% of American workers in debt. The average savings of those who struggle to pay their bills is around $4,000, but about 30% of adults in the U.S. have no emergency savings. About 5.2% of the workforce has multiple jobs. What percentage of those who are unhoused and/or housing cost-burdened would you imagine are also living paycheck to paycheck? Or who are also working multiple jobs? Or who also owe student loan or medical debt? I can't rightly say what the overlap is, but I have to imagine it's at least not zero. You could be working multiple jobs, always financially on edge, have a college degree, and it's still possible that you're living in your car and unable to get a career in the field that you went into debt for. And while labor productivity is up about 300% since 1950, the median household income has only increased about 150% in that time. So we're even producing more value with our labor for all this effort and still have little to show for it. And does it seem like a lot of the stuff that we're buying isn't lasting as long as it should? Well, that's because it actually isn't. With all the little ways the companies have concocted to squeeze yet more pennies out of us, strides in artificial obsolescence are definitely among them. Planned or artificial obsolescence is the deliberate effort to make goods you buy break or become less useful a lot sooner than it normally would, thereby forcing the customer to replace their goods more frequently, i.e. purchase them again. Have you noticed how most cell phones now no longer have removable batteries? Have you ever noticed how after software updates, your electronics seem to move just a little bit slower each and every time until eventually it just stops working altogether? Ever notice how your car seems to need a new repair seemingly every couple months? Ever notice how often your shoes seem to be getting worn out despite you not partaking in any marathons or parkour sessions? Ever notice how car manufacturers seem to restrict access to replacement parts, so you can't just buy a new piece and replace it yourself? You have to take it to a dealer and hope they're not gouging you just to replace a spark plug or whatever. Or how there's always a new phone every 6 months or so, because I don't know, I guess they just suddenly figured out a way to cram just that much more processing power into your already tiny devices. Or they figured out yet another way to utilize another camera lens on the back of your phone, so now we have 7 lenses or whatever. Or think about how so much of the food items we have nowadays are filled full of trans fats, sugars, salts, and high fructose corn syrup, and how it's all pretty much bad for you, and it's all addictive in some fashion. Our generation's not going to have to deal with tobacco or lead poisoning, but we are all hooked on caffeine, vapes, and microplastics. Think about how many coffees or energy drinks you need to be able to function through your normal day, and ask yourself how many hours you have to work in order to make enough to afford your daily dose, or your weekly dose. You started drinking them just to get through work, and now you're working just to be able to afford to drink them. And I bet you none of that is contributing to your future good health. Good health, that's another bummer, isn't it? Even with a job and insurance, you can barely afford the stuff you need to keep yourself functioning. Probably not a lot of spare time or money to go exercise or fix yourself healthier meals. Getting old's no joke, even if you can avoid some of the more serious illness and injury, can avoid huge emergency medical bills, can avoid that medical debt for now. Regular wear and tear is going to happen to your poor, fleshy vessel, whether you like it or not. Are you ever going to be able to retire? Or are you just going to be working until the day you die? Just to keep your health insurance, just to keep getting the care you need to put off your rickety bones just collapsing entirely. And who's going to be with you through all of that? Dating's always been more art than science. Navigating complex interpersonal feelings between unique individuals is tricky even for the most rizzed among us, but developments in broad social and emotional intelligence makes it all a little trickier. Which isn't a bad thing. It's good that we had the Me Too movement to make people think more carefully about how they interact. It's good that we're rejecting toxic masculinity and rigid heteronormativity and strict church-officiated state-enforced monogamy. It's good that we're prioritizing health and happiness and well-being over a need to pair bond for the sake of arbitrary societal norms. But these new dynamics aren't making the game any easier, most especially since work and finances are keeping us atomized, are keeping us from being free to socialize and meet up with people in casual formats. And we're now reliant on apps and algorithms to meet up and try our luck. And just because our attitudes are changing regarding all of this, that doesn't erase old standards regarding expectations, realistic or otherwise. We all know that this life is a wild, unpredictable ride, and we know that everyone is valid and worthy of love and more complicated than just a few pictures and text blurbs can convey. But that doesn't stop us making unfair snap judgments based on initial impressions and a few brief, nervous interactions. And with a newfound importance placed on personal well-being and an infinite catalog of potential suitors to peruse at our leisure from the comfort of our couch, we can't help but be a little quicker to be dismissive. We can't help but think that we're just a few swipes away from a potentially more ideal partner with a potentially more ideal fairy tale courtship that we could be missing out on by going on a second date. And again, inexact science. I don't know what the solution to that is. I don't know how we can make it that much easier to test our options, or even if it gets much easier without doing things that make the results much worse for the participants involved. The reason so many of our parents and grandparents were so miserable with their marriages was because they didn't take relationships as seriously in terms of making them happy and healthy. They just kind of forced themselves to get into relationships and then forced themselves to stay in them when they didn't go well. Doing it the hard way might be the only way to get the most desirable results. But humans are by nature social animals. Even if you're introverted or asexual or aromantic, you're not really meant to be alone. You're not meant to be lonely. Meeting your social, emotional, and even sexual needs are necessities for a healthy life. But they're so hard under these circumstances when all your time is spent either at work or at home and you don't have much time or money to go out and do other stuff. We long for companionship, but even engaging in the anxious, self-conscious, nerve-wracking, and frustrating effort of relationships requires us to also manage the near Herculean task of escaping. escaping the gilded cages of lonely homes, lonely offices, lonely commutes, lonely shopping and eating via apps and delivery services and drive-thrus. It's even hard for making platonic relationships work. We don't live in tight-knit, interdependent communities of friends and neighbors and local businesses who wave to each other on the way to the 9 to 5, who ride the trolley or bus together, who meet up after for dinner and drinks, who go home to big, multi-generational households. We traded all that long ago for white picket fences, nuclear families, and the big box change stores. And since then, we've traded all that for the 24-hour gig economy, remote workplaces, Amazon delivery, streaming services, and internet dating. I don't envy any of you single folks. And not to be an asshole, please hear me out on this before you write me off, but there's a special added layer of difficulty for young heterosexual men in this situation. Despite all the social progress we've made, whether it's fair or not, there is still this lingering expectation that men have to have their shit together and be capable of being providers in heteronormative relationships. Again, regardless of whether or not this is a fair expectation given all the data I've dropped on you thus far, men and women both kind of expect cishet dudes to have a job, have a car, have a home, have financial independence, and have their mental health in order. We all know the stereotype of the dude who still lives with his parents, or the dude who doesn't have a job, or the dude who's constantly broke. A total loser, right? Just an absolute stoner, slacker, do-nothing who spends all his money on Funko Pops and Overwatch loot boxes, who has no skills beyond obsessive knowledge of the trivial, and who has no motivation to accomplish anything beyond eating junk food, collecting trinkets, and finding a woman who will tolerate living in his parents' home with him. And with increased awareness of patriarchy and misogyny and rape culture, there's increased scrutiny and criticism of dudes who might be a little bit off, whether that's mentally, emotionally, or socially. We've all heard too many horror stories, whether that be in movies or on the news, and we all kind of lock on to the least charitable archetypes when a dude's just a little weird or awkward, right? Norman Bates, Buffalo Bill, Joe Goldberg, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Jack the Ripper, Ted Bundy, Ed Kemper, Michael Myers, Leatherface, so on. It's all too easy for us to imagine stalkers and predators in their panel vans or basement dungeons, or cabins in the woods where these creeps might take their victims and do gruesome things to them. Or maybe it doesn't even go that far, but you still come to rather unfair and unflattering perceptions of them. Images of unwashed, cartoon-obsessed, chronic masturbators who lurk on depraved internet message boards and have filthy fantasies about helpless women or children going through their greasy, bespectacled, fedora-wearing, neck-bearded heads. Now obviously there are plenty of very real, very tangible privileges to being a straight cis man, and I'm not suggesting that anyone should feel obligated to put themselves in harm's way if they feel unsafe in any situation. But this is one example of how patriarchy oppresses all of us, even if some of us don't have to worry about getting sexually assaulted when walking out to their car late at night. And not only are men denied much emotional vulnerability from other demographics, we don't even take care of each other all that well either. Men are not socialized to be vulnerable with each other, not socialized to form more meaningful emotional connections with each other. Feelings and emotions are for girls, and economic struggle is a sign of poor character. Men who complain to their peers about being sad or having a hard time are called pussies and told to get over it and work harder. You're expected to be a strong, stoic, independent, self-sufficient, self-made, lumberjack warrior king with a submissive, obedient housewife. And anything less than that, any failure to meet that standard, is evidence that you're a failure as a man, as an individual. And even among the most well-adjusted and progressive of dudes, it's an expectation that comes from within as well as from without. Even if we're not always thinking about it in terms of what would impress Gunnery Sergeant Hartman from Full Metal Jacket. Even the kindest, softest cishet man has "Coffee is for closers" playing in their head right alongside "Losers always whine about doing their best," Winners go home and fuck the prom queen. When dudes can't live up to this masculine ideal, they're just as hard on themselves as everyone else is. And that social and emotional isolation does us no favors. Men are 4 times as likely to die from suicide. And if you remember my other dude videos, you might recall some nasty statistics regarding men lashing out violently at others. In 2021, 12.3 million US adults seriously contemplated suicide. 3.5 million of them made a plan, and 1.7 million made an attempt. Of the 48,000 in the US who died from suicide that year, 38,000 of them were men. All the metrics of success and independence and fulfillment and well-being have been put so far out of reach, and we can't help but feel like we failed. All the previous generations were able to do it, able to make money, buy houses, go on vacation, get married, retire. They were all able to successfully do this adult thing. Why can't we? Why can't we be adults? Why are we so bad at this? Why are we fucking up so hard? Why can't we just get in the fucking robot, take charge of the situation, and just do this hero shit, goddammit? Why are we so weak and useless and cowardly and selfish? Alright, breathe. Take a second if you need to. There's a lot that I just dumped on you. But I'm hopeful that if any of that applies to you, that I've at least illustrated 2 things to you. Number 1, I hope that you can at least see that your struggles are not unique. And I'm not saying this to trivialize your feelings. When depression hits, it's easy to feel like you're struggling alone, that you're the only one living in this hell, and that everyone else has it all together and is capable of functioning while you just can't. But you're in good company. There are so many others, too many others, who are hurting and are frustrated and who have common interest in making things better and getting better. And number 2, I hope that you can also see how little of this is actually your fault. When things start going wrong, when your needs aren't being met, it becomes easy to blame yourself for these problems. Again, from your perspective, seemingly everybody else has been able to do this, and thinking that way, your brain starts to tell you that it's your fault that you're miserable and that you deserve to be because of some dumb thing that you did or didn't do that led you to this point. And obviously, I don't know you and I don't know all the decisions you've made in your life. Certainly, some of them might have contributed to where you are now. But I hope you can at least see that with things as they are, so much of the pain and hardship you might be enduring is no fault of your own. Circumstances beyond your control have formed a perfect storm of hardship, and you just happen to be caught in the middle of it. And whatever mistakes you may have made, none of them justify you being so hard on yourself, and none of them justify you suffering. You would never permit any friend or loved one to talk about themselves how you talk about yourself. You are a valid, important, worthwhile human being, and you deserve to get better. You deserve to be secure, you deserve to have your needs met, and you deserve to be happy. Everyone does. You're not an exception. Depression is a disease. It has physiological effects on the brain. It releases chemicals and hormones that impact your thoughts and feelings. It's a disease that convinces you that you are fundamentally incapable of feeling better. But that's just it. It's a symptom of the disease that makes you feel that way. Again, I'm not trying to invalidate your feelings, but please try to remember that you are feeling this way long term because of your sickness. Please try to remember that treating this sickness will take away some of the symptoms that make you feel this way and will allow you to heal. You are capable of getting better. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but you can get better, and you deserve to. Included below at the very top of my long list of sources and statistics is a link to a site which offers mental health resources. You'll notice the .gov attached, so it's not a commercial site. Once again, I'm not trying to sell you telehealth or whatever. It has a number of sites and hotlines for all kinds of circumstances that you can use if you need help and you're struggling, but you don't feel like you have anyone you can turn to. Please don't hesitate to reach out to them if and when you need. In fact, if you're feeling this way even a little, it might behoove you to seek therapy sooner rather than later. Waiting until you're in crisis, until you're having a breakdown, is a suboptimal way to approach mental health. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure, as the saying goes. And okay, that's great and all, but having a break-in-case of emergency resource and knowing that your troubles are not your fault doesn't change the fact that you are going through all this right now and that you still have very real material conditions that are causing this depression. I'm sure a lot of you already know how fucked up things are, and you could have looked up a website on your own without me. So fucking awesome of you to have this touchy-feely little message at the end of your big bummer of a video, DBiddles, but a hug and a kind word from an internet stranger doesn't mean diddly fuck. I need solutions. That's totally fair, viewer. And I'll confess, I can't offer you much. I'm not a licensed therapist, I don't know you personally, and I can't lift you out of poverty. I wish desperately that I could do more. But maybe I can offer some small bit of advice that can get you started. It's not much, but it's something. Depression, like I said, is a physiological phenomenon as well as a psychological one. It's a battle fought on two fronts. And while our options for addressing your mental distress are somewhat limited by time, money, and specialized skills and knowledge, there are simple, accessible things you can do to help the problem physically that can in turn help your problem mentally. You know, if you have the flu, medication is great, but maybe some hot soup, some clear fluids, and some steam can ease you along also. Now, this isn't going to fix anything. You can't bootstrap or hard work your way out of depression. But this is stuff that can help you, like, maybe improve a little bit until you can get in to see a therapist or until your material conditions improve. So tip number 1, a good diet. I know this is a bit of a luxury in some instances. Good nutrition is another thing that is frequently put out of reach for the economically disadvantaged. And as we covered, that includes a great many of us. Ramen noodles and Kraft Dinner run you about $1 or less per pack, while fresh fruit and vegetables are a little pricier, and they have a limited window of opportunity with which they can be consumed. Not to mention the time and effort it takes to prepare. Even if you can afford the stuff you need to make lemon pepper salmon fillets and a kale salad, do you really have the time and energy to cook that for yourself after you get home from a 10-hour shift? Or do you just want to fling some frozen meal in the microwave and eat that on the couch while rewatching The fucking Office for the 100th goddamn time? Obviously, I don't anticipate you cooking and eating HelloFresh on the daily, but once or twice a week, try to eat something that isn't drive-through or pre-packaged meals and snacks. Meal prep's not a bad idea, but make sure you also get a little variety in there too. If every night is just grilled chicken, rice, and carrots, while it might be healthier than Tombstone pizza and Doritos, it's not exactly going to be the kind of enjoyable experience that makes your brain happy. Look up recipes, maybe incorporate some multivitamins into your daily habit, or maybe consider splurging once or twice a week on a slightly nicer restaurant experience. Or even just consider cutting back on some of that between-meal snacking. I know those little treats bring you some momentary joy, but after that joy comes crashes from all the sugary, salty, greasy, fatty highs. Plus, they're subtly addictive and leave you snacking on them long past the point you might actually want to be. I'm not saying you have to cut the Nutter Butters and Funyuns and Cherry Coke completely out of your life, just dial them back a little and maybe consider that you might sometimes be reaching for them more out of impulse than anything. Portioning them out might be a good idea. Also, water. Never underestimate good hydration. Tip number 2. A regular sleep schedule with an appropriate amount of sleep. I know we're all working hard and that sometimes we either don't get enough sleep due to how much shit we have to do, or because we deliberately stay up too late because it's the only way to get any leisure time into our daily routines. But seriously, you need your sleep, man. Staying up until 3 a.m. playing League of Legends feels like the only way you have any control over your life, even if you then have to be up again by 6 to get ready for your morning commute. And hey, I get it, a little bit of the night owl routine seems fun, especially since you can count on your pals White Gummy Worm Rain and Pink Lemonade Ghost to have your back. But those aren't really substitutes for a full 8 hours. And doing what you can to keep that circadian rhythm on track will go a long way to improve your mental health. Because when you get tired, the hits of everyday life hit just a little bit harder because your brain's not running on the full recharge it needs to process things. It's why tired so often equals irritable. Naps can also help if you can fit them in. I'm personally one of those lucky people where sometimes just 15 to 20 uninterrupted minutes of sleep in the middle of my day is kinda like having a Mega Man E-Tank in the middle of the boss fight. However you do it, make sure you're not sleep deprived any more than you have to be. Tip number 3, a little spot of exercise. Once again, I know, going to the gym or finding time and energy to use that stupid Peloton can feel out of reach. Maybe getting up 90 minutes early to go swim laps at the YMCA or go for a jog or lift weights in the basement just isn't feasible for you, or it gets in the way of getting that full 8 hours I mentioned. I totally understand, and I'm not expecting you to undergo rigorous fitness routines, but a little light exercise, just 15 to 30 minutes of push-ups or sit-ups or even a brisk walk around the neighborhood to get your heart rate up and get your endorphins pumping can do a lot for you. I'm not trying to get you on some weight loss routine, I'm just saying a sedentary lifestyle is not healthy for you, physically or mentally. You spend all day sitting at a desk or driving a car or lounging on the couch or laying in bed, all while under artificial lighting. It can actually be more draining on you than if you did have a little jog before breakfast. And I know how it is when depression has you in its grips. Even stuff you normally like doing feels like such a big ask. Even having a little bit of fun seems like such a massive effort, and it leads you to just lying on your back, scrolling your phone, because nothing feels like it'll be worth getting up and getting dressed for. And because you're doing even less stuff, and you're not having that little bit of leisure, but you can see other people on your phone or on TV doing exciting, enjoyable things while you can't, you get even more down on yourself. So stuff like exercise feels like a big ask, but trust me, even a little bit of physical activity, if you don't get any during your work hours, can go a long way, make you feel like you accomplished a little something, particularly if you do so outside. Believe it or not, humans are actually solar powered a little bit. Too much sunlight can give you cancer, but a healthy little bit of UV rays causes your body to synthesize vitamin D. It's no accident that sunshine is associated with good moods, while cloudy, rainy, snowy weather is associated with gloominess. And that brings me to tip number 4. Socialize. Humans are not meant to be all by themselves. We're not meant to spend all our time moving back and forth between little isolated boxes. Bedroom, car, cubicle, bedroom, car, cubicle, bedroom, car, cubicle. No, stop it. Even if you're introverted, even if you're spending a lot of time doing something fun or leisurely, playing video games or watching your favorite show or reading a really good book series or scrolling on your phone, if you're alone with your negative thoughts too much, it's going to eat away at you. And so much of our society seems insistent on maintaining that social alienation and atomization for a number of reasons. We talked about how hard it is to date, but even just platonic socialization is tricky. I have a number of good friends I barely ever get to see because I'm frequently so busy or because our schedules don't line up. And no, social media and internet forums and video game voice chat aren't going to count here. You know, we have our homes and we have our workplaces, but we used to have what are referred to as third places. They were neutral places outside of the home or work that were open to the public, where people could congregate and socialize without too much expectation of financial transaction. Taverns, town squares, public parks, etc. Think of how many scenes from the show Friends take place in the Cafe Central Perk, or how often the teenagers in movies and television hang out at like the mall or the arcade or some diner or whatever. That's the kind of thing you're after, a place where you can hang out and talk with people and maybe even meet some new people. Oh, but DBiddles, I'm so bad at talking to people, and I don't know where I can just go to meet people and strike up some conversation without being awkward. I know, viewer, it's not easy, and it'll require doing a little legwork to find what's local for you. But I bet you that somewhere out there's some kind of local social media group or newsletter that can keep you informed about neighborhood get-togethers or local goings-on where you can meet and interact with people in your community. I bet your local library has some kind of corkboard with flyers for a chess club or book club or hiking club or sewing club. I bet if there's some kind of local comic shop or gaming shop in your area, that they might have some kind of weekly Magic the Gathering night or Dungeons and Dragons night or something. I bet your local sports bar has a trivia night or a karaoke night, or would just be a great place to watch the game with some like-minded patrons. Who knows, maybe joining a local bowling league or mini golf league will be a great way for you to make some new connections, make some new friends. Maybe you can even find some potential romantic connections. Maybe you'll be a little awkward at first, but don't let that discourage you. This can be a low-stakes way of developing more social skills and making some good connections. And if you don't like it, you can just not go back. Find something else. There are so many people in this world that you can spend time with if you just go out and find them. Just take a night off from playing Helldivers 2 and watching Netflix and put yourself out there. And of course, viewer, I know none of this is going to solve all your problems. None of this is going to alleviate your financial woes. And none of this is a substitute for medication and/or therapy if that's what you really need. I'm not saying that this is going to fix you. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a life coach, I'm not a guru, I'm not even a high school guidance counselor. I'm just a dork on the internet. I'm not saying that your depression is because you're not living according to my tips, nor am I saying your depression can be solved simply by following my tips. You know, mental health is so important to our society nowadays, and yet our society does so little to facilitate that mental health. And because it's so important nowadays, I think that's why so many of our generation are so sensitive to this, and it's why so many of us are feeling so depressed. And that's why we have to do everything we can to take care of ourselves and take care of those around us. Please, 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 in addition to all my little tips, if you can, seek professional help if you're suffering from mental illness. Do it before you get in too deep. You can't just anime protagonist training arc your way to better mental health. You are not some shonen hero. Real life is more complicated than all that, and some of these challenges are unreasonable. It's okay to be scared of getting in the robot because the robot's fucking awful. It's okay to struggle with your everyday challenges. Your brain is being mean to you because it's hurting. You are hurting. It's okay to be a little fucked up over it. Everyone's a little fucked up. It's not all your fault. You do deserve happiness, health, stability, and love. You are valid. And as a valid, worthwhile, deserving human being, you have to do what you can to fight for the joy that you're entitled to. Because the world as it is not structured in a way that it's going to do much to facilitate that joy. I hope you came through that one no worse for wear. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for supporting me throughout this past year. I know I don't have a whole bunch of viewers, but please know that I appreciate each and every one of you. Your continued viewership has meant the world to me, and I'm so grateful that I have even just the few of you who are here who like listening to what I have to say. There were a couple of times this year I wasn't sure if it was worth keeping this thing going, or if I should just pack it in and go ahead and put all the bots together all at once. Just get it over with and move on. But knowing that you all tuned in has kept me going. I'd ask you again for a like, comment, or a subscribe, but you guys have already done so much for me, and all I really want is to keep making stuff that you guys enjoy. And I hope that my next bot does that for you. That's right, this 1 year celebration is a two-parter, in case you forgot. And striving for a brighter future is what my bot here is all about. So we'll see you for the next one. Chatbots mission complete. This is DBiddles, signing off. Sayonara, bye-bye.